In this video, we will look again at one of the readings that we did in class, Air Traffic Control in the USA. We will try to look again at the structure of the reading and more importantly, to learn some new vocabulary words that you can actually take from this passage to put in your speaking and writing to boost your lexical resource score. So my advice is always you should not do so many readings. Don't do practice after practice. It's more important to do one carefully before you move on to another. So when you read a passage, so you try to stop there first to analyze the structure of the passage and to analyze the answers to the questions and to learn vocabulary from it before you move on to another passage. Make sure that you take full advantage of each and every reading passage that you do to learn something new. Okay, so the reading passage that we are dealing with is air traffic control in the USA. As what I already told you in class, before you actually read the content of the passage, try to stop here a little after the title of the reading to ask yourself three questions. What, why, and how? What is it about? What do I already know about the topic? In this passage, is quite straightforward just from the title that the reading will be about the control of air traffic, the regulation of airplanes in the airspace of the United States of America. And then the second question, why? Why is this piece of writing written? Why does the author decide to write about this? There are three common purposes of writing: to inform, to persuade, or to entertain. And from this, just the title, we can know that the main purpose of this writing is to inform the audience about air traffic control in the USA. And the third question, the how will the writer write about the topic? How will the ideas be developed throughout the passage? I think this is the most important question to ask yourself before you actually move on to read the whole passage, the content of the passage. And from the title of the passage, we can guess that the author will write about different measures to control air traffic in the USA. Okay, so there will be maybe a list of different measures and descriptions of such measures to control air traffic in the USA. But it's also logical to think that before the author actually writes about air traffic control in the USA, he or she may try to provide a little background information on the topic. And the background information here may be problems associated with air traffic in the USA. So we can make a very educated guess here at this moment that first, the author will write about problems, issues related to air traffic in the USA, and then he or she continues to write about different solutions, different measures to control air traffic, to solve the issues that have just been mentioned. So just from the title of the reading, we can guess that the pattern of idea development in this whole passage is problem and solution. And if you can stop after the title and think about it, and you guess the pattern of idea development of the passage, you can actually get yourself very, very mentally prepared for the information that is coming. Okay, so we now move on to paragraph A of the reading passage. An accident that occurred in the skies over the Grand Canyon in 1956 resulted in the establishment of the FAA to regulate and oversee the operation of aircraft in the skies over the United States, which were becoming quite congested. It's a very long sentence, but when you have a long sentence, don't get overwhelmed, don't get discouraged, because it's a long sentence, but the core information here is very little. You can see when you have a long sentence, try to identify the main verb. The main verb here is result. Okay, and before the main verb, here should be the subject, and after the main verb, here should be the object of the sentence. And in the subject, you can see there is a relative clause here. Okay, so the essential information is just an accident. Okay, and the essential information in the object is just the establishment of something. And you see a phrase here starting with to is actually just to complement to to complement the idea there, to do something. So this is actually about the purpose of an action, right? So the core information is just an accident resulted in the establishment of something. And this is happily also the topic of the topic sentence of the first paragraph. And if you continue reading and you pay more attention to the essential information in the paragraph, you will see that the pattern of development, the structure of this paragraph is cause and effect. I already draw a very simple diagram here of the main events that are mentioned in the paragraph. An accident that led to FAA establishment, and then FAA establishment led to ATC, air traffic control, and ATC led to better safety of flight in the US and also in other parts of the world. Okay, so again, I want to remind you about the 5 basic structures of idea development in each paragraph. The first one is cause effects, and then problem solution, compare contrasts, specific description, and then time order or sequence. And in this paragraph, the pattern of idea development is cause and effect. And again, I want just to I just want to reiterate that the heading or the topic sentence should actually reflect that kind of structure in the reading passage, because the heading, right, is just a summary of the whole passage. So it should reflect the main logical development, the main idea logical relationship in the whole passage. And the structure here, the main logical development here is cause and effect. And you can see here, heading aviation disaster, prompts action. Aviation disaster is the accident. And action here is the establishment of FAA and then ATC, which then led to better safety of flight in the US and over much of the rest of the world. Okay, and pay attention to the word prompt. Prompt means to bring about something, to cause something. Okay, and most of the time an action or a feeling. Okay, so the heading again should reflect the structure of the passage. And what I also want you to do after each paragraph that you read is you try to stop there, you try to reorganize your thoughts, try to draw a simple diagram of the paragraph to make sure that you fully understand the content of the paragraph before you move on to another. And here are some vocabulary words that you can learn from this paragraph so that you can actually use them in your speaking and writing. Aviation. Aviation is a very good word, a very academic word that you may encounter again and again in your reading, in your listening, and you can also use it in your speaking and writing. Aviation meaning the science or practice of flying in aircraft. You should actually know this words because it will come up again and again in reading passages and listening recordings. Okay, and some common collocations that you may need to know. Aviation school is the school that teaches people how to fly a plane. And then aviation industry is the business sector dedicated to manufacturing, making, and operating, running all types of aircraft. And aviation safety, this is actually the topic of our reading. Okay, it deals with air traffic control. Okay, so it's about the control of air traffic, the control of the flight of different airplanes, aircrafts. And if you remember what I told you in class, aviation, the root of the word is avis. Avis in Latin is birds. Okay, so the adjective form of avis is avian, relating to birds. Some of the common collocations that you may need to know: avian flu. Flu is the short form of the word influenza. Avian flu is an infectious disease that spreads very quickly among birds and can sometimes kill them. And I think avian flu can also be transmitted to humans. Some other examples: feathers are part of avian anatomy. Anatomy is basically body structure. So feathers are part of the body structure of birds. This word is also very important, anatomy. You will encounter it sometimes in writing task 1 when you need to describe the anatomy of an animal. Okay? We can talk more about this later, but this word you will encounter in your reading, your listening, and even your writing. Laying eggs is the avian method of reproduction. Okay, so reproduction, remember the word reproduction means breeding, right? Giving birth. So laying eggs is the method of giving birth, of breeding among birds. Bird watchers are avian experts who know how to tell birds apart. Okay, so they are experts about birds and they know how to tell birds apart, tell something apart. This is a phrasal verb, tell something apart, meaning you distinguish, you can differentiate, you can discriminate among different similar things. Okay, tell something or somebody apart. And these are great examples that I took from vocabulary.com. And as I already told you in class, this is a great site for you to learn new vocabulary because they provide very detailed explanation of words and they have very great examples and they even make up some stories for you to remember the new words better. And in your speaking and writing, if you want to sound a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more academic, when you want to say a bird species, you can actually say an avian species. Okay, so a bird you can say is an avian animal. Okay, so you can use this phrase to sound a little bit more sophisticated, more academic in your speaking and writing. And the second word that you can actually learn from this paragraph is regulate. Regulate is just to control something, especially by making it work in a particular way. And I think it's more like to control something by rules. So it's the control from an authority, for example, the government. Okay, so when you want to say control, but by rules, you can use the word regulate. It's a better word, it's a more academic word, and it's more sophisticated. You can use in your speaking and writing. Police can invoke the law of trespass to regulate access to these places. Trespass means entering a place that you are not supposed to enter. So entering a place without permission. Okay, regulate here means to control access to these places. So when you want to say control something by rules, you can use the word regulate. Or here, the government has introduced new laws to regulate the sale of firearms. Okay, introduce new laws to regulate something. Okay, so use laws or rules to control something. You say regulate. And you can use this word actually in many of the writing topics. Maybe the government should introduce laws to regulate the sale of maybe of cigarettes, of fast food, for example, right? So you can use this words actually in the problem solution type of essay a lot. And we have also a great collocation here: introduce a law, right? Introduce a law meaning bring in a law, right? So that law is new and now it come into practice. So the government has introduced a law, or the government has brought in a new law. Okay, The next word, oversee. Oversee is actually to supervise. So when you want to say the word overseas, oh, supervise, you know that there is an alternative, which is to oversee. A team leader was appointed to supervise the project. Just mean a team leader was appointed to oversee the project. Okay, the next word on the list is congested. Congested means full of traffic. Congested airspace. So there is very heavy traffic in the airspace. Congested airspace. Or London's roads are heavily congested. Remember this collocation. Heavily congested just means very congested. Okay, so try to use that adverb next time when you say, for example, the road is congested. You can actually say the road is heavily congested, meaning full of traffic. And the last prepositional phrase here, in place, it means existing and ready to be used. Funding arrangements are already in place. You can see here in the paragraph. Similar air traffic control procedures are also in place over much of the rest of the world. Okay, so in that case, in place meaning existing and ready to be used. Okay, so that's paragraph A, and now we will move on to paragraph B. And what you can see from here is A is actually the introduction of the whole passage. It introduced the topic of the whole passage. And as what we discussed before, B may continue on the topic. It may provide some background information on the topic of air traffic control. Okay, so we start reading B. Rudimentary air traffic control, ATC, existed well before the Grand Canyon disaster. So just from the first sentence, we can see that it will provide background information about air traffic control in the USA before the Grand Canyon disaster. So actually the writer now goes back in time to see what are the methods of air traffic control were there before the Grand Canyon disaster. And just from the first sentence, we can actually guess the main pattern of idea development in the passage, which is chronological order, time order. And you can see here as early as the 1920s and then by the 1930s. So the focus here is different events happening at different points of time in the past. And you can see here the heading actually reflects that kind of structure. First steps towards ATC. Okay, so from the reading, from the heading, we can see that, okay, the paragraph writes about different steps towards ATC in time order. First steps. So it may mention the first step and then the second step. Okay, so they are the earliest steps towards ATC. And you can see here in paragraph B, there were two main developments here, right? 1920s and 1930s. In 1920s, air traffic control was purely visual system using lights and flags and beacons and flashing lights. And by the 1930s, there was actually radio communication. Okay, so it was no longer only purely visual, but there was also radio communication. Okay, so that was the first two developments of air traffic control in the USA. We can learn some new words actually from this paragraph. Rudimentary. So there are basically two meanings here, two major meanings here that you can learn and apply in your speaking and writing. A rudimentary knowledge or understanding of a subject is very simple and basic. Gradually, I acquired a rudimentary knowledge of music or my rudimentary German. So when you talk about your knowledge of a specific aspect, you can say my knowledge of that aspect is very rudimentary. For example, I speak English, but I also speak a little of another language. So I can say maybe my Thai is actually very rudimentary. I can only speak basic phrases, for example. And the word rudimentary in this paragraph is actually used in the second meaning. Rudimentary equipment, methods, systems are very basic and not advanced. Okay, so you can see here rudimentary air traffic control. So that is a system, that is a system which is very basic, not advanced. Here you can see some example. Subsistence farming is in its most rudimentary form. What does it mean by subsistence farming? Subsistence farming is when the farmers they do farming just to sustain their life. So the products that they can produce, that they can make, are actually used for their own survival. They consume what they produce, and they do not have extra to sell to other people. So that is called subsistence farming. The classroom equipment is pretty rudimentary. Okay, this is a very good word actually, and you can use in your speaking. Uh, for example, when you want to talk about your knowledge of a certain aspect, you can use the first meaning. But when you want to describe an equipment, you can say that equipment is kind of rudimentary. For example, in a recent IELTS writing task 1 question, they asked you to describe a stone equipment, a piece of stone equipment. And then you can actually use the word here, rudimentary, to describe that stone equipment. For example, here, right? So there basically there are two forms of that stone equipment. And you can see here it's very rudimentary in the first picture. Therefore, in task 1 of the writing test, instead of saying a piece of equipment is basic, is very simple, you can say that piece of equipment is rudimentary. Okay, we move on to the next word in the list, vicinity. Vicinity is also a very academic word that you can actually use in your speaking and writing. The phrase is oftentimes in the vicinity of something, meaning in the area around a particular place. For example, the stolen car was found in the vicinity of the station. There used to be a mill in the vicinity. Or you can say, for example, in the vicinity of my house, meaning in my neighborhood, basically. Okay, or you can say, for example, you can use this phrase to speak about the location of some place in IELTS speaking part 2. You can say it is in the vicinity of my company, of my school, for example. Or there can be other phrases that you can also use to describe something that is very near. For example, you describe a place which is in the vicinity of your schools. You can just say it's just around the corner from my school, or it is in a walking distance of my school, for example. So there are different phrases that you can actually use to talk about the location of something if you want to use such phrases in IELTS speaking part 2, the long speech of 1 to 2 minutes. The next word on the list is approximate. Approximate here is a verb, it's not an adjective like we oftentimes use. Approximate here is to be similar to, but not exactly the same as something. You can see here the word approximate. The first region to have something approximating today's ATC was New York City. Okay, so to have something that is similar to today's ATC was New York City. we have some example here. Your story only approximates to the real facts. Student numbers this year are expected to approximate 5,000, to be about 5,000. So this word you can use in your writing task 1. Okay, oftentimes you will see that you will write students number in this year are expected to be approximately 5,000. But now when you know this word already, you can change the part of speech of the word to use it in a more advanced manner. You can say students number are expected to approximate 5,000. Okay, the next word in the list is metropolitan. The root word is metropolis. Metropolis is a very large city that is the most important city in a country or area. So when you describe Hanoi, you can actually say Hanoi is a metropolis. Okay, instead of saying Hanoi is a big city, Hanoi is the most important city, the political center of the country or the heart of the country. You can say Hanoi is a metropolis, and you can actually add more information. Hanoi is a metropolis. It's the political center of the country. It's the heart of the country. Okay, the city has become a huge, bustling metropolis. Bustling meaning what? Uh, Bustling means full of activity. Okay, so when you say the city is bustling, meaning the city is full of life, full of activities. So you can see here from what we read in the paragraph, you see it is actually in time order, and you see the first two developments here in ATC 1920s. If you remember 1920s, ATC was very rudimentary and it was purely visual. So they just used visual cues to direct airplanes, aircrafts. And in 1930s, the system was better, was more advanced, with the assistance of radio communication, I guess. Okay. Yes. So these were the first two developments in ATC. Okay, so that is paragraph A and paragraph B.